Hi, my name is Massimo Re Ferre. I'm a technical product manager with the Cloud Native Application Business Unit at VMware. In this brief talk, I'm going to talk about container registries. In the previous shooting, I have introduced the concept of containers and the concept of basic concept of Docker. In this particular session and in this particular brief talk, I'm going to talk about registries. In the previous one, I focused more on the build and run process that we will go through very quickly in this session as well. But in this shooting, I'm going to focus more on the push and the pull. So as I alluded to in the previous shooting, build, push, pull, and run are the four important atomic operation that you can do against the Docker host. When it comes to the build and the run, basically the processes that you describe in a Docker file how your application and the packages that your application requires look like. You basically script that into what's called the Docker file. You run a build against the Docker file, and the Docker file produce an image, or the build process produce an image that is hosted on the Docker host where you're running the build process against. When you have an image, then on the same host, you can run that image, and that run basically instantiate that Docker image as a container on that host. What we're going to briefly talk about here is the notion of being able to push and pull that Docker image. One of the advantages of Docker, one of the many advantages of Docker, is that when you're building your application, the artifact of your application as a Docker image, it is very easy to share that image with someone else. The way that this works is because Docker, when they introduce the very core technology, they have introduced the notion of a hub where you can actually push and pull these Docker images. The Docker hub lives in the cloud, right? So basically, in order to be able to share these Docker image with someone else, what you have to do is basically you have to push this image into the Docker Hub service that, as I said, lives in the cloud or in the internet. Right? So basically, if you do a push of this image, you will be able to push this image all the way into Docker Hub. I'm going to hide some of the details of how this works and the naming convention and everything. Suffice to say that it's very easy once you produce an image to actually push and share it with anybody else that is connected to the internet. At this point, what happens is that if someone else would like to use your image, they can just pull that image off of Docker Hub and they're ready to go, without having to go obviously through the build process, which is probably something that you have to do as the owner of the application. This works beautifully, but a lot of customers are asking for other option to store those images in on-prem registries. Right? So basically what Docker provides and what the ecosystem has been building upon is the notion of the Docker registry as a piece of software that you can instantiate wherever you want. Right? You can obviously instantiate this Docker registry in the cloud as well, but most likely a lot of users are interested in the use case of instantiating that Docker registry on-prem. One of the Docker registry that I'm going to talk about is Harbor. Harbor is an open source project sponsored by VMware, and basically what we have done is we took the open source version of the Docker registry that Docker has been writing. We took that code and we extended it to add enterprise features to it. We keep Harbor as an open source project. We reuse actually Harbor as a technology inside our product. But as a user, you can go on GitHub and download Harbor and instantiate Harbor inside your own data center or in the cloud as you like. Some of the features that we add to make it more enterprise ready are role-based access control. We also add a UI or a graphical user interface. We also add a replication mechanism so that you can have multiple Harbor instances inside your data center or across multiple data centers and let Harbor replicate those images without having you to push those images into different Harbor services. And obviously, Active Directory and LDAP integration. So these are some of the features. We have more inside Harbor, but these are some of the features that we are basically adding to the basic Docker registry. As I said, we keep Harbor open source, so you can go on GitHub and download Harbor. So why are people interested in doing these versus going into Docker Hub? We came across a number of different use cases, three of which, the three most common use cases are latency, right, and speed. So if you have to push a large image or multiple large images to Docker Hub on the internet, you have the internet as a roadblock, obviously. So people may be requiring to have an on-prem setup of a Docker registry where they can push and pull images faster. Regulatory requirements, where there are some customers that would like to keep those images on-prem and they would not like to push them into a service running on the open internet. And the third use case that we came across very often is that some of the enterprise customers that we have been working with do not have open access to the internet. So some of them are able to set up Docker on a number of Docker hosts, but they do have problems in reaching out Docker Hub because of the policies that they have from a networking and firewalling perspective. So having a local hub inside their organization makes their sharing inside the company of those Docker images much easier. Thanks for watching.